And there were also some different different opinions of how to approach the civil rights movement. And there's going to be those that approve of nonviolent approaches and those that would prefer more violent approaches. So, of course, with the nonviolent approach, we've talked about Martin Luther King. So he was for boycotts, which is a refusal to either buy goods or to participate in, or to, for example, ride the bus, those kinds of things. Protest, you know what protests are. Civil disobedience, you learned about this in 8th grade with Henry David Thoreau. This is basically you break the law to prove a point. They didn't like that the law was that you had to be segregated on a bus, so they tried to integrate themselves on a bus, or they tried to do other things to prove a point and to show their distaste for a certain law because they felt like it was, morally or socially wrong. Sit-ins, this is going to be an example at different lunch counters in the South, where they had these lunch counters in stores that that only whites could sit at. So what they do is a lot of African Americans participated in sit-ins where they would go and sit at these counters and refuse to move. And there's all kinds of pictures that you can look up online where they're covered in mustard and ketchup and food because that was the way that the people reacted to these sit-ins. It was pretty... it was a little more violent than what they were hoping for, and it's pretty disgusting. The violent approach. You're going to see this more you're going to usually see Malcolm X associated with the violent approach. He wanted to meet violence with violence. So whenever they saw people getting attacked when they protested, he wanted them to attack back. He also didn't want people to depend on the goodness of white people. He felt like that the African Americans needed to take care of themselves. He felt like Martin Luther King's nonviolent approach was not powerful enough and wasn't going to get the job done. Another group in this militant group is going to be the Black Panthers. They're going to want African Americans to take care of themselves in their own communities. They're going to demand reparations for the Black community from people that were suffering from slavery. And they also supported greater opportunities for African Americans. During this time, and this is all in we're getting into the 1960s when Lyndon B. Johnson's president. He's going to have another program that he's going to support, which is called the Great Society. And the Great Society, the main goal of that was to address the economic inequality in the United States. So he's going to have various components of this Great Society. The first one is going to be civil rights. He's going to, again, champion civil rights. We know we saw the Civil Rights Act of 1964, and we saw the Voting Rights Act of 1965. And he's also going to introduce the idea of affirmative action, which we still see in practice in some places today. And this is requiring employers with federal contracts to take positive steps to raise the number of minority employees and to correct past injustices. Sometimes you'll see with college admissions where, let's say, somebody that's African American and somebody that's white has the same credentials and they're trying to decide between the two to go to college. Sometimes they'll pick the African American because, again, they're trying to increase the number of minorities in colleges, also in employment. So this is seen today as it's turned into something that's kind of controversial today, is affirmative action. Also in the Great Society programs, Johnson's going to have what we call the War on Poverty. He's going to pass the Economic Opportunity Act, which is going to create an office to administer programs that are established by this act, and this includes the Job Corps to train underprivileged youth, and the Peace Corps, which is going to help depressed areas. And we still have the Peace Corps today. He's also going to have in this Great Society program the Medicare Act in 1965. This is still in effect today. This is health care for people over 65. If you're retired, usually you have health insurance through your job. Well, if you don't have a job anymore because you're retired, then it's harder for you to get health insurance, and it's usually expensive. So this was something put in place to help people over 65 to still have health care. He also wanted aid to cities, and so he created a new cabinet post to help with this. And they started providing money for urban planning and slum clearance and rental assistance for the poor and reconstructing buildings. And some of this is going to happen because there was a decline in urban areas after a lot of people started moving out into suburbs, and it lowered the tax base and revenue for cities. Something else that's going to come up during this time, great, and sometimes associated with the Great Society programs, is Title IX, and this bans sex discrimination in educational institutions. So the big effect of this is going to help women pursue higher degrees, compete in sports, and then enter jobs in educational fields that were previously dominated by men. Where you'll probably see this the most today is I don't know if you noticed, but when you look at a major university like the University of Texas, you have the same number of male sports offered as you do female sports. So if we have 10 different sports teams for men, then we have to have 10 different sports teams for women. So if you ever just take a look at that, and if you see that with a college or a university, that's because of Title IX. Now, since African Americans were getting expansion of their rights, other groups started seeing that maybe they could also expand their rights as well, and they were influenced by the African Americans and their civil rights movements. So this led to a rise in other movements. The women's liberation movement, and one of the leaders in that is Betty Friedan, who wrote The Feminine Mystique. Here's an excerpt from The Feminine Mystique, and she talks about each suburban wife struggles with it alone. She's afraid to even ask of herself the silent question, is this all? So she's talking about all the things you do as a stay-at-home mom, and maybe there's more that you can do. During this time, you're going to have somebody suggest the Equal Rights Amendment, which this was actually suggested in the early 20th century and has been voted on multiple times, but has never been passed. And some people still argue today, do we still need an Equal Rights Amendment, or are we past that? Some of the results of this movement, you're going to have more gender equality in education and employment, new attitudes about women, and also Roe versus Wade is going to get passed in the 1970s, and this legalized abortions, which is, again, still a hot topic today. Another group that's going to call for more rights and opportunity is the American Indian movement. So their goal was to seek greater respect for their heritage, and then they also started bringing up the term Native American instead of calling somebody an Indian. The Chicano movement is going to focus on rights of workers, especially migrant workers, and their voting and political rights. Your main people involved with the Chicano movement is Cesar Chavez, who is going to start a group to support farm workers' rights in California. And then Hector Perez Garcia, he's going to be responsible for getting more fair treatment of Mexican-American veterans. There were some that after World War II, they fought in the war, but then they couldn't get access to veterans' health cares or veteran hospitals or even the benefits you get after being in service. And so he fought for getting those equal opportunities for benefits in the military. One of the artistic movements that comes out during this time is the Chicano mural movement, and these are paintings that are all throughout the Southwest, and you'll see quite a few of these in Texas and El Paso. And again, it's just trying to get the message out of the Chicano rights and that they are not a minority.